I wasn't supposed to be there that morning. That's the thing nobody tells you about the moments that stay with you. You never plan for them. You were just passing through. You were tired, underdressed for the weather, half thinking about whether you'd left the gas on at home. And then something happens right there in front of your eyes, and you spend the next several years trying to explain to people why it cracked something open in you. It was a Tuesday in late October. I remember that specifically because I'd just come off a night shift at the hospital. I'm a nurse, have been for 11 years, and I was cutting through the park on my way to catch the tube home. Hyde Park, that stretch that runs along the edge where the morning joggers are still out at 7:45, where the geese are already being territorial about the paths like they own the place. The air had that particular October quality that London does so well. Cold enough to see your breath, but not cold enough to justify the heavy coat you left behind because you thought you'd manage. The trees had gone full amber. Some of them had already dropped half their leaves overnight, and they were plastered wet against the pavement in a way that made the whole path look like it had been decorated by someone who cared too much. I had my headphones in. I was listening to nothing. Actually, I sometimes do that, put them in just so nobody talks to me. Antisocial? Probably. Survival mechanism after 12 hours of being needed by everyone? Absolutely. The crowd was the first thing I noticed. Not a crowd, exactly. More like a gathering. The kind that forms when people aren't sure yet if they're allowed to stop, but something is pulling them anyway. 20, maybe 30 people clustered along the railings near the East Carriage Drive. Most of them with phones already raised, which in London means something is either about to happen or has just happened, and nobody's sure which. I pulled one earbud out. Someone near me, an older woman in a green Mac with a little terrier tucked under one arm, leaned toward her companion and said, very quietly, "That's their car. That's definitely their car." I looked. A convoy. Not ostentatious. Not the full procession you see for state occasions with the outriders and the flags snapping in the wind. This was quieter. 3 vehicles. Dark, discreet, the kind of cars that are expensive in the way that doesn't announce itself. A small police presence ahead. Minimal. And the middle car had slowed, almost to a stop for reasons I couldn't immediately identify. The woman with the terrier grabbed my arm. I didn't even know her. She just grabbed it like we were old friends and pointed. The rear window of the middle car was down. Not all the way. About 4 inches, maybe 5. Just enough. And a hand had come through the gap. A woman's hand. Pale, ringless on the right side. A bracelet catching what little morning light there was. And the hand was pressed flat against the outside of the glass, palm out, like, I don't know how to describe it except to say it was the kind of gesture you make when you're leaving someone at a train station and the doors have already closed and touching the glass is the only thing left. The crowd understood before I did. Because here's what I didn't know yet. What everyone else around me had apparently already worked out from their phones or the news or that particular frequency of information that moves through London crowds like weather. William and Kate were on their way to carry out what would be their final joint public engagement before a period of extended leave. A goodbye of sorts. Not a permanent one, nobody was saying that, but a stepping back. A pause. The kind of announcement that had come through official channels a few days earlier in the language that royal communications always use, which is to say, formal, careful, revealing nothing and everything simultaneously. I hadn't read about it. I was on nights. I was barely reading anything. But I was standing there watching a hand pressed against a car window as the convoy slowed to almost nothing, and somehow even I, underdressed and sleep-deprived and 3 steps from the tube, understood that I was watching something private happening in public, which is the most royal thing of all when you think about it. The car stopped entirely for about 40 seconds. 40 seconds is nothing. 40 seconds is how long it takes to make a cup of tea badly. It is not a significant unit of time in any practical sense. But 40 seconds of a royal convoy stopped on a park road with a hand pressed flat against a window and a crowd of 30 strangers holding their breath. That 40 seconds had a weight to it that I still can't properly account for. What happened, I pieced together afterward from the people around me who were more informed and less zombified than I was. The convoy had slowed because there was a small group, 8 or 10 people, who had apparently been waiting along that stretch specifically. Not a mob. Not the organized chaos you get on big royal days when people stake out spots the evening before with fold-up chairs and thermos flasks. These were just people who had known, somehow, that the route would pass through here. An elderly couple, a few young women, late 20s, who were crying in that particular way where you're trying not to, where you keep pulling the corners of your mouth back. A man in his 60s holding a handwritten sign that he'd lowered to his side by the time I looked, so I never saw what it said. The hand in the window. It moved. It lifted slightly and then came back down against the glass. A small motion, like a wave that couldn't quite commit to being a wave. Or like pressing harder, the way you do when you don't want the warmth to stop. One of the young women near the railing made a sound. Not a sob, something smaller. A single exhaled note, like a word that hadn't found its shape yet. The terrier woman beside me had both hands over her mouth, and I stood there with my one earbud in, listening to nothing, watching a moment I hadn't been invited to, but had been given anyway. I've tried to explain, since then, why it hit me the way it did. My sister says I'm a crier, always have been, that I cried at the end of Paddington 2 in a full cinema without a shred of remorse, and she had to pretend she didn't know me. That's fair. That's accurate. But this wasn't that kind of feeling. This wasn't the clean, cathartic sadness of a story that resolves well and leaves you warm. This was more uncomfortable than that. Because what I was watching, I think, was the particular loneliness of public love. The way some people have to do their most human moments, their griefs, their transitions, their small acts of connection, in front of strangers and cameras and the specific weight of being known. And they do it anyway. They keep going. The convoy moves when it's supposed to move. The hand comes back inside the window. The glass goes up, and the crowd on the pavement watches and feels something they'll carry home and set down in some quiet corner themselves, and maybe not know what it was until much later. The convoy started moving again, slowly at first, then at normal pace, and then it was past us, and the park was just the park again, and the geese were back to being territorial, and someone nearby had already started talking about what time the tube was running. The terrier woman turned to me. She had very blue eyes, 70, maybe 75, the kind of face that's lived in it, been weathered by it, come out the other side of it with her humor intact. She said, "Well, that'll stay with you." And then she walked away, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Part 2. What the people on the pavement said. I didn't go home. I know. I should have. I had been awake for, let me count, about 19 hours at that point, and my feet were doing that thing where they've forgotten what it felt like to not hurt. And there's a perfectly functional tube station 3 minutes walk away that would have had me home, and horizontal inside 45 minutes. I stayed. Not in any organized way. I didn't make a decision, exactly. I just found myself drifting toward the small cluster of people who were still gathered near the railing, and I sort of stopped moving. The way you do when you realize you're not finished yet with a place, even though you can't explain what you're waiting for. There was a bench. I sat on it. The elderly couple I'd noticed earlier were still there. They'd sat down on the next bench along, very close together, not talking. The woman had her hands folded in her lap, and was looking at nothing in particular, that middle distance there that means someone is somewhere else inside their head. Her husband, or whoever he was, had his arm around her shoulders with the particular ease of people who've been doing that exact gesture for decades, who don't have to think about where to put their arm anymore. I don't know why I'm describing them so specifically. I didn't speak to them. I just noticed them, the way you notice things when you're very tired and your filters are down and the world feels slightly more real than usual. The young women who'd been crying had collected themselves. They were talking in that rapid, slightly overbright way people talk when they're processing something emotional and aren't ready to be still. I caught fragments. I didn't think I'd feel it like that. And it's just when you've followed everything, you know? And she looked tired, didn't she know? Not bad tired, just... And then they dropped their voices, and I lost the thread. The man with the sign was gone. I never found out what it said. A woman sat down on my bench. Mid-40s, I'd say. Burgundy coat, sensible boots, the look of someone who works in administration and is very good at it. She had one of those reusable coffee cups with a rubberized grip, and She was holding it with both hands like it was a hand warmer, which it probably was. She didn't ask if the seat was free. It obviously was. She just sat, and we existed next to each other for a moment in the comfortable anonymity of strangers sharing public space. Then, she said without preamble, without looking at me, my mom was a huge fan of hers. I said, was. She looked at her coffee cup. March. And that was that. That was all she said about it. And I didn't push, and we sat there for another minute while the park continued being a park around us. But I understood what she was doing there. She wasn't there for herself, exactly. She was there for her mother. She was there because her mother would have been there, would have gotten up early for this, would have known the route and the timing, and stood at that railing with her phone out. And now that she couldn't, this woman in the burgundy coat was doing it instead. The way the living sometimes show up at the places the dead love, just to stand in for them. Just to say, someone was here. Someone noticed. I don't know why strangers tell me things. It happens all the time, actually on bus journeys, in queues, in hospital waiting rooms. My sister says I have a face that looks like it's already forgiven you for whatever you're about to say. I don't know if that's a compliment. After a while, the woman in the burgundy coat stood up. She said, to no one in particular, I'm glad I came. And then she left. I got talking eventually to one of the young women. Her name was Priya. She volunteered this immediately, in that warm, slightly flustered way of someone who is still emotionally activated and needs to talk at someone or they'll float away. She was 28, she told me, had moved to London from Birmingham 4 years ago, worked in digital marketing, had watched the royal wedding when she was 9 years old sitting on her grandmother's living room floor eating crisps, and had never, she said, never expected to feel about any of it the way she felt today. It's not even like I'm a super fan, she said. That's the thing. I don't have a mugs or whatever. I've grown up watching her go through things, and it's like she stopped. Search for the word. It's like when someone you vaguely know has a really hard year, and you see them across the street, and they look okay, they're walking, and they're dressed, and they're getting on with it, and you feel something about that. You feel proud of them for something you can't quite name. I thought about that for a while. Yeah, I said. That's exactly it. We sat there for a bit, the two of us, in the way people do when they've said the true thing, and don't want to dilute it immediately with more words. Then, she said, do you think she's actually okay? I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have an opinion, but because it didn't feel like the right thing to put between us. What I thought was, I think okay is a moving target. I think okay is something you're on some days, and not on others, and the trick is not letting the not okay days make you forget the okay ones are coming. I think anyone who does their not okay days in front of the whole country and keeps going anyway deserves something. Not pity, not sympathy exactly, just the acknowledgement that it costs something. That it costs more than people say. But I just said, I think she's trying. And Priya nodded like that was the right answer. The thing about watching something like that slow convoy, that hand on the glass, is that it reshapes everything around it slightly. Like when you've been looking at a bright light, and then you look away, and for a second the world has a tint to it, a shadow where the light was. I walked to the tube eventually. Finally, my feet were categorically furious at me. And the whole way there, I kept thinking about the gesture. That hand, palm flat against the outside of the window. Which direction was it facing? Toward the crowd? Or turned inward, back toward someone inside the car? I couldn't be certain. I'd been at the wrong angle. I'd been too tired and too far back. But I think about it differently depending on which way I imagine it. If it was turned outward, toward us, that's a gift. That's an acknowledgement. I see you here. I know you came. If it was turned inward, pressed back against the glass toward someone inside, that's something else. That's private. That's the two of them moving through the city together, and her hand on the window between the world outside and whatever was happening in that car in that silence. Both versions undo me slightly. Part 3. What you carry home, my flatmate was awake when I got in. She's a morning person in the aggressive, cheerful way that I find professionally impressive and personally baffling. She had already done 30 minutes on the exercise bike, made a smoothie that was an alarming shade of green, and was standing in the kitchen in her running gear reading something on her phone with the expression of someone who is fully operational and resents no one for it. She looked up when I came in. You look like you've been hit by something, she said. Emotionally or physically? Both a bit. I told her what I'd seen. The convoy, the crowd, the hand on the glass, the woman with the terrier, Priya, the burgundy coat woman, and her mother who died in March. I told her all of it standing in the kitchen in my coat, and my lanyard still around my neck, because I hadn't taken it off yet. She listened. She's a good listener. Another quality I find professionally impressive and personally rely on heavily. When I finished, she said, "You should write it down." Why? Because you'll want to remember it exactly as it is right now, before you start editing it in your head into something tidier. That's what I've tried to do here. Tell it as it was. Not tidied. Not made more meaningful than it was, or less meaningful than it was. Just the park on a Tuesday in October. The amber leaves on the wet pavement. The 40 seconds. The hand. I've thought about it a lot, since in a particular circular way the mind returns to things it hasn't finished processing. Why keep coming back to isn't the moment itself, actually? It's what it generated. The 30 strangers on the pavement. The way a woman grabbed my arm without knowing me. The way Priya couldn't explain what she was feeling, but landed on something true anyway. The way a woman sat next to me and told me about her mother in 2 sentences, and that was enough. The way the elderly couple sat together on the bench in the particular silence of long marriage, not needing to explain anything to each other. The moment in the car, whatever was really happening behind that dark glass, produced all of that. It rippled out. It passed through 30 people on a pavement in Hyde Park on a Tuesday, and changed the color of the morning for every one of them. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot when you think about it. There are things you see in this job, nursing, that you don't have language for immediately. Moments of specific human weight that sit with you for years before you understand what they were teaching you. A patient squeezing your hand at 3 in the morning, not because they need anything, just because they need to know someone's there. A family gathered in a corridor, not talking, just arranged around each other in the particular geometry of people who are afraid and are afraid together. The way grief moves through a room differently than every other emotion. Not like weather, but like gravity, invisible, just suddenly heavier. You learn to recognize the weight of things. What I felt watching that convoy wasn't grief. Not exactly. It was more like witnessing. The particular honor of being present for something that mattered to other people, something that you don't have full claim to, but that chooses you anyway, briefly, because you were standing in the right place at the right time with your headphones in and one earbud out. The geese were still being territorial when I left the park. The tube was running fine. The city went on being the city, vast and indifferent and quietly magnificent in that way it has. I got home. I took off my lanyard. I slept for 11 hours. And when I woke up, the first thing I thought about was the hand on the glass. The way it pressed there for 40 seconds in the cold morning light, saying whatever hands say when words aren't available. Whatever that was, it was enough. Some goodbyes don't end when the car moves. They stay on the pavement, held by strangers, carried home in coat pockets, turned over quietly in the dark, because the people we watch from a distance sometimes carry pieces of ourselves we didn't know we handed them.